and started taking me and my sister when we were teenagers and just getting some exercise and feeling healthy. Over the years, I watched both of my parents make physical fitness a priority. And then as I grew older, of course, learned more about how our physical health can impact and be impacted by other areas of life.
Awekenge, this is Mental Metals, hosted by Asekho.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Mental Matters. I'm your host, Asekho. And before we dive into today's incredible conversation, I have a small favor to ask. If you enjoy what you hear today, please take a moment to rate and review our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Your feedback not only helps us improve, but also helps others discover the valuable insights we share every week. And if you find today's episode particularly inspiring or insightful, don't forget to share it with your friends, family, or anyone you think could benefit from it. Thank you for your support. It truly means the world to us. Now, let's get back into our conversation.
To kick things off, to a set individual that is unaware who you are, and who is Karen, and what made you be so interested in when it comes to being a keynote speaker? Why you dedicate your life in terms of focusing on wellness, especially wellness? Where did that route start?
It probably started for me with just physical fitness, wanting to be physically healthy. And this is something that goes back to when I was a teenager. And in the 1980s, we started doing the aerobics classes. This was before there was anything formalized, even like jazzercise. So my mom started going to these classes and started taking me and my sister when we were teenagers and just getting some exercise and feeling healthy. Over the years, I watched both of my parents make physical fitness a priority. And then as I grew older, of course, learned more about how our physical health can impact and be impacted by other areas of life. When I was 50 years old, I actually trained to teach fitness classes. And as I began teaching, I would watch people coming into a particular gym where I worked, where we had some pretty intense workouts, and was becoming aware that we can work on becoming a very physically fit person, but if other areas of our life are not really in balance, what good is it? What good is it to be perfectly physically healthy and have my relationships not healthy, or to be mentally struggling, or, having my heart, not right? So that just kind of got me on the track of pursuing more holistic wellness, being healthy in all areas of our lives, not just physical fitness.
Mm-mm. And it's quite interesting when you say holistic, because it's some sense that we're always told that we should pursue medical when it comes to when you come across a sickness. No, you should go to the doctor and you're given pills, things like that. And when you speak holistically, it's something that I've seen that it has grown. It has gained a lot of attraction, and people have realized that they can actually heal themselves in a way of, instead of, I'm not saying that going to a doctor, it's a wrong thing, but at the same time, it's something that what to someone, it might actually have bad side effects, whereas you take a certain pill and you realize that, or flip, instead of actually this pill making me feel better, it's actually making me feel worse. It's quite something that I've analyzed and I've seen, and I'm someone that I realize that just because there are types, two ways to do things, why don't we actually integrate it? And it's a conversation that I myself trying to actually start. And as someone that doesn't have a doctorate or have any medical background, but as someone that has seen the gap within that problem, I realized that how about we integrate those things? And going back to what I've said about COVID-19, and definitely it took us all by surprise. And I understand that it has been actually 5 years since COVID-19 kicked. And funny things that that was the year that I started my podcast and started to actually do this work when it comes to mental health. And really, it exposed a lot about mental health compared to the previous years. So I believe that your husband contracted COVID-19 twice. So can you walk us through that? How did you feel? How, in terms of, as especially COVID-19 had people have died from COVID-19. Did any of that worry?
So my husband, he contracted COVID-19 twice in 2020, and our family has actually dealt with it, I think 5 times altogether since then. So it's it's been around, and we've been around the block with it. But yeah, the first time my husband got sick was right after the quarantine started and at the beginning of everything. And uh, we had been away for about a week and then road tripped home and had just enough time to scramble and get toilet paper and and restock things.
Mm.
And then about a week later, he started feeling badly, and we had a friend who was a doctor at the time, and then also he was talking with his doctor over telehealth. And even though, there was a small window where we live in Colorado where you could get a COVID test, and then that shut down. So by the time he was sick, you couldn't get a test to confirm COVID, but we had 2 doctors he talked to and said, "Oh yeah, this is classic with all of the symptoms." And he was sick for 6 weeks. Um, and the hardest thing was, he would feel bad for a while, and then he'd have a day where he'd feel really good, and he's like, "Okay, I'm over it." And then he would do something like go out for a bike ride or get some exercise or just be active and normal, like, "Okay, I'm over it," like you do with any illness. You get over it and you feel fine, and then you go back to life. But that would just trigger his body going into all of the symptoms again, and then he'd feel bad for a week or 5 days or something. So for 6 weeks, it was these cycles of feeling okay and then feeling horrible for several days, and then a day or 2 of feeling okay and then feeling horrible. And then at one point, he got to the point where he was really, really struggling to breathe, and that was where it was a real blessing to have a friend who was a doctor, because he was able to call her in the evening when he was like, "I might have to go to the emergency room." And at that point, that's when the biggest fears kick in, because if somebody goes to the hospital, they might not be coming home. Um,
Mm,
and
mm,
so he talked to our friend on the phone, and she said, "Okay, what you're experiencing and what you're describing is what I'm seeing a lot. It's pleurisy, and it's like an inflammation of the lining in the heart or the lungs. And so just take some ibuprofen and use um, he has had a history of asthma, so use some of the treatments for his asthma." And then that helped him to feel well enough in the next day that he didn't have to go to the emergency room. So that was the moment of the, "Oh my goodness, is it really that bad?"
mm,
But fortunately, we had somebody who could talk him through, "This is what you're actually experiencing, and then you don't have to go to the hospital." So that was a blessing for us.
mm. And definitely it had its own implication mentally. And as you've said, that in terms of actually realizing he might not actually come back from the hospital because of so many cases, people went to hospital only to realize that that was the last time they see their loved ones. And COVID-19, as I've said, that is actually exposed a lot of mental issues, and especially when it comes to you spoke about when it's about depression and that thing of isolation and being not being with your family or not being with your friends. You usually here in South Africa, it was that 14 days of actually staying quarantined. And it for me, I remember I was I was at my university res, and imagine staying alone in a room and not actually seeing people, as someone that loves seeing people, and realize, oh flip, I'm not getting out. And even though I had this podcast pushing me, but I wanted outside interaction. And something that you actually you mentioned that it had you worried about in terms of how he actually felt and going to a hospital. So can you walk us through mentally how did you actually feel? And not only you, but or your family, how did they feel actually seeing the fact that one of their family members is going to hospital for COVID-19?
Yeah. So there's so much in what you just said, Asekho. And one of the things that I really resonate is that the perspective that COVID-19 didn't cause mental health issues, but it brought to light things that were lying under the surface for so many people.
Yes.
And so um, like our family, our youngest daughter was in kindergarten at the time, and she was going to school and then came home for spring break, and we thought, okay, spring break might last an extra week, but then they never went back to school, right?
Mm,
And I can't imagine for you in university, like you love to be with people and it gives you life and it gives you joy. And now you're stuck in your room and you can't see these people that you
mm,
love. Oh my goodness, that is so hard. So all of the things that bring us joy were suddenly taken away from us. So um, just trying to go back to your question of how did it just impact us mentally and me
yeah.
mentally. Um, One of the hardest things for me was I said that in 2020, our family or my husband got COVID twice. We were exposed to it twice in July. So this was months later after, yes, COVID was still there, but we were kind of coming out of the quarantines a little bit. But one of my son's very best friends got married. And so my son was part of the wedding party. And then we found out a week later that everybody in the wedding party, including my son, who told me this while sitting on my bed in my bedroom, got COVID. And so I was like, "Oh my gosh, get out of my room and go back to your room." And I'm spraying the whole place with Lysol. But that's when my husband got COVID a second time.
Mm,
But my brother was also getting married that summer, and their wedding was scheduled for the end of May in Mexico, and they couldn't have their wedding at the end of May, so they rescheduled it for the end of July. And I went through so much with, oh my goodness, I'm about to travel to Mexico for my brother's wedding, but now I have COVID in my family. And can I go to the airport? And if they ask me, I can't say, no, I haven't been exposed to COVID, even though I have no symptoms and I'm fine. So, anyway, I had to cancel that trip. And so there was such a load of disappointment and discouragement for me at that time because I had been now since the middle of March until July for months and months pouring myself out to give to my family. And we do this, like, I'm just supporting my family. I was supporting my older daughter, who was really struggling with her anxiety and having such a hard time that she couldn't take care of her child, who was, I think, about almost 2 at that time. And so I was watching my 2-year-old granddaughter every day. I was helping my daughter, who was in kindergarten, trying to do school, and she hated doing online school, and she didn't want to participate in these every morning lessons, and she didn't want to have to do any of this. And then my husband, he was sick for 6 weeks and then got better, and then he gets sick again. And so I was like, more than anything, I just wanted this opportunity to get away, to have a break, to be with my family, to go to the beach in Mexico. And then that got taken away from me. So that was so discouraging. And I had to find a way. I had to kind of dig deep within my own soul and my own heart and say, I'm going to be okay. I can't just put my hope in getting this one weekend long break. I have to find some places to put my hope in long term. And
Mm,
for me, my faith is really, really important. So I had to turn from putting all my hope in getting away for a weekend to put my hope into just knowing that God loves me and that I was going to be okay. But it was really hard after spending so many months just pouring myself out.
mm,
And then to have that one opportunity to take a break taken away from me.
mm. Definitely, it's not easy to convince yourself that everything's gonna be okay. And you keep telling yourself that at the same time, back of your head, there's some bit of yourself saying that I'm lying to myself, that I'm not fully convinced that everything's gonna be okay. And definitely for not being able to do the things that you want, I can only imagine that it's only frustrating. And it's something that I believe that not only that time all of us felt, but in every day of our lives actually experience. And we want to do some things that will actually make us happy, only to realize that, oh, flip, I can't do this because of this and this and this and this, and because of our situation. I just want to actually move the conversation to first 85 A's, which is in
Yeah.
terms of addiction. So, you perform CPR on your daughter after
Yes.
her overdose, and how did you actually feel at that moment of actually have to perform CPR on your daughter? And would you say that it's something that you ever imagined doing?
It's it's something that, because I teach fitness classes, and I teach fitness classes generally to older adults, so people over 65. So on some level, I'm glad that I need to have this training because I might use it at work one day, maybe. So there is a little bit of imagination I might need to use it, but I never thought I would be using it in my own home and with a family member.
Mm,
So yeah, there was a day my daughter and came running upstairs. They were using one of our rooms in the basement, and he said, "Something's wrong, and I need you to come downstairs." Um, and so I went running downstairs, and there she is, just passed out on the side of the bed. And at that point, my brain went into um, just like turned off the emotions, and I went in to do what needs to be done. And so the training kicked in, and I called 911. And so knowing that I had somebody on the phone, the emergency dispatcher, who was calling for help, and at the same time they're trained to talk you through. So I had my own training in CPR,
mm,
and so I was like, it was like having a person in the room with me who also knew what I was doing. And so going through that, I was just at that point in the mental state of, I'm just going to do what I need to do. I'm just going to, rely on my training. do CPR. I know how to do this. There wasn't any fear. There wasn't any kind of what if this doesn't happen? None of that was in my mind at the time. So I think that our brains do kick into, for lack of a better word, sort of a survival state. Like we do what has to happen. And so that's where I was at that time. And then of course later on, I kind of went into, whoa, what if this hadn't gone
Work.
this way?
Yeah.
What if she hadn't taken that breath? What if, so later on, there was a lot of what ifs and concerns. But in the moment, I wasn't even thinking about any of that. I was just doing what I knew to do.
Definitely, most of the people, I would say, including myself, would panic and not know what to do. And even though some people out there might actually have the training, but might not consider themselves as first responders. And especially, I have realized that uh, that kind of training is important. You never know who you might help. You might help a friend, you might help a stranger, you might help a family member. You never know who might actually need that. So, at what point did you realize that it was addiction?
Um, so at that point, she had just had surgery for a broken nose. So the story she told us was that she had like, taken her medication too soon or too quickly together. We didn't realize at that point that it was just really a horrible situation with the boyfriend at the time, and they were doing a really good job of hiding what was really going on from the rest of the world. But she, when she was in pain after the surgery, he said to her, I can give you something else that'll help you with the pain other than these prescription meds. And so he gave her fentanyl. She didn't know that he was giving her fentanyl until sometime later. Um, but when we realized months later, there were some other situations that happened, and we discovered that he had been using hard drugs in our home and around our family, and it was like, nope, he's not welcome back anymore. And then a few weeks after that, there was a night when our daughter said, "Hey, can you just watch my daughter overnight? I'm going out with some girlfriends, and then I'll be back in the morning." And then she didn't come back. And it was weeks and weeks, and we filed for guardianship because she wasn't coming back, and she kept texting me saying, "Oh, yeah, I'll come back," and then she wouldn't, and, just one thing after another. So finally, um, it was a couple months later, she came back, and at that point, she opened up to me about everything, and she said, "This is what's been going on. I've been using these drugs. I didn't even realize what he gave me, but, you know, then I was addicted, and the only way I could keep getting what I needed was to be with him because he was supplying the drugs to me, and he was just so manipulative. It was downright evil, to be honest, with, telling her, "Oh, I'm the only one who's gonna give you what you need, so you have to stay with me." Um, and so anyway, so when she came back, in that point, she asked for help, and we helped her get into rehab, and then that's another whole cycle of rehab and relapse that is very normal. People go into rehab, but then, um, if they're not really ready for recovery, then they can easily relapse. Or if they don't know how, when they're not in rehab, to continue their work, then they will relapse because, she said, I thought that the people around me would support my sobriety, but even if they weren't using drugs, they didn't care if I stayed sober. So she would relapse, and then she went back into rehab, and then she relapsed again. At that point, they were like, nope, we can't take you back here. And, um, and so she ended up actually homeless for a while. So anyway, that's her whole story. But yeah, you asked me when I realized what was going on. And it was actually after she had been gone and came home, and she opened up to me and told me about the addiction and the drugs, and that was why she had collapsed and almost died that one day, because she had overdosed.
And I believe that, going back to what I've said in terms of holistic, that sometimes it's better to actually look at things in a holistic way in terms of medical way, because I believe the reason why there's a lot of drug use, or one would say substance abuse, is the fact that we actually given a lot of pills, and these different lot of pills, they claim that it helps with this and this and this and this, not realizing that at the same time you are drugging us. At the same time, you are actually exposing us to addiction, to drug addiction, because these are not just pills; they are drug pills. For example, let me take an example. I myself had problems sleeping, and it would take let's assume that I decided to sleep at 9 p.m. I would actually eventually sleep at 11 because I have problems sleeping. So I came across these pills that actually help me with sleeping. But one thing that I realized is the fact that at some point I almost got addicted, because without those pills I couldn't sleep. I couldn't sleep. So it's I believe that it's a conversation worth having when it comes to addiction, because addiction plays a huge role in someone's life. And once you dedicate yourself in terms of a certain type of pill or certain type of drug, it's quite hard to actually let go. And it's the story that you just shared. It's such a story that I believe that to someone that might listening to this episode might actually be an eye opening, because another thing that I realize is the fact that some people don't have you, as you spoke about, actually people around her not supporting her. Actually, a lot of people don't actually have that. Don't actually have that certain individual that will support them. At some point, that even though they keep on relapsing, go to rehab, relapsing, go to hell, relapsing, and they don't see that a certain individual isn't trying, not realizing that they are trying their best, but eventually the people that they surround themselves with, they don't care about them. And it's quite hard to actually be in that phase. I can only imagine. I do not know the experience, but I'm quite sure that it's quite hard to be in that phase of keep on, I would say, be on the path of healing. As you've said, that in when it comes to healing, it's not something that you eventually decide that I'm healing now. It takes time. It's a process, and you need to actually be in line with the process, because at some point, if you actually tell yourself you're gonna do this, and eventually you eventually, I would say, what the word there's this word I'm looking for. You don't eventually heal. You'll be disappointing yourself. And I feel like after drugs, and if one doesn't find that healing they were looking for, eventually it leads to suicide. It's what I've actually observed.
Mhm. And there is hope for people who are caught in addiction, even if
Definitely.
you have gotten sober and relapsed. I would say to anybody who is struggling with that, there really is hope. And in fact, the friend who I mentioned earlier, who's a doctor, um, told us at one point that typically people in addiction, on average, will go through this sobriety and relapse cycle 7 times. So even if it feels like it's been so many times and I'm still not able to stay sober, that doesn't mean there's no hope. There really is hope. So I would say that to people who are struggling with this, with addiction. And I think also the importance of having other people to support you in your sobriety is so important. So it's so crucial. So don't give up hope. That you can do this, and whether it is through a 12-step group that you find help and support, or somewhere else, there are people out there who are cheering for you and rooting for you, and will stand with you as you work to get sober.
Definitely. Actually, I'm quite seeing the time, and it seems that I won't actually ask the whole question that I initially wanted to ask and drive this conversation. But I just want to ask you two final questions. So, what would you tell your 2019 self about resilience?
Oh, I would say that you're going to go through some hard stuff, and it's going to make you stronger. You will become resilient, and you're going to see some amazing things that are going to come out of the hard things.
And I believe that we always tell ourselves a lie that I would never go through hard things in my life, and that I got everything in control, not realizing that there are things that are out of control. There are things that you actually don't have any type of control, no matter how much money you have, no matter how many assets you have, no matter how many people you know that are high in places, you eventually come across a difficult challenge in life. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that you should give up on yourself. At the same time, that doesn't mean that you should actually say you actually in a way of saying that life is not fair. Yeah, we understand that life is not fair. But for example, you are still here because life was hard on you. That didn't mean that you should actually off yourself. Many people actually opt in such things. So one thing that I'm big on is addiction. And I remember back in July, I did a series on addiction the whole month of July. I actually had episodes on addiction because I believe that is a huge problem. And not only here in South Africa, not only in America, but globally. So my final my message my final question to you is, what final message to listeners what final message would you actually deliver to listeners that are in their own storms?
Final message I would share with your listeners. Don't give up, even if it feels hard, even if it feels impossible right now. There is hope. And I would say that the connection with others in your life is really crucial. Um, Finding support. And if you don't have that support yet, um, there are people like me out there who are ready to stand in there and show you that you are loved and you are worth the fight.
I love it when you say that you are worth the love and you are worth the fight. And I believe that it's something that many people out there will need to hear, and actually, especially people that have given up on themselves. So, Karen, thanks so much for being here. Really appreciate your
Thank you.
time. Really enjoy the conversation, and definitely will reach out to you for the next episode in terms of as I myself want to actually continue this conversation, and I actually enjoy our conversation. So again, thank you so much for